Memphis, Tennessee, July 30th, 1954. The sweltering heat of a southern summer night hangs thick in the air as Club Handy pulses with the raw energy of rhythm and blues. On stage, a nervous 19-year-old with slicked-back hair and trembling hands grips his guitar, sweat beading on his forehead under the harsh spotlights. His name is Elvis Presley, and he's 3 weeks into the most important month of his life. Then the club's back door opens. A silhouette appears against the Memphis streetlights. A tall, elegant figure carrying a guitar case, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who owns every room he enters. The musicians on stage don't notice him immediately. The crowd doesn't turn. But something shifts in the atmosphere, like the moment before lightning strikes. Elvis is halfway through, that's all right, when he sees him. B.B. King, the king of the blues, standing in the shadows at the back of the club. Without warning, without explanation, Elvis stops singing, mid-verse, mid-note. The sudden silence cuts through the smoky air like a blade. What happened in the next 30 seconds would change both men's lives forever, challenge the racial barriers of 1950s America, and create a friendship that would reshape the very foundation of popular music. This is the story of the night when respect transcended color, when talent recognized talent, and when two kings discovered they could share the same kingdom. To understand the magnitude of this moment, you have to understand Memphis in 1954. The city sat at the crossroads of America's musical soul, where the Mississippi Delta blues met country music, where gospel harmonies collided with honky-tonk rhythms, where black and white musical traditions existed in parallel universes that rarely touched. Beale Street was the heart of black musical culture in the South. By day, it was a bustling commercial district. By night, it transformed into a neon-lit paradise, where blues legends like Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, and B.B. King held court in crowded clubs filled with smoke, sweat, and the kind of musical electricity that could change your life. Just a few miles away, the Grand Ole Opry represented the pristine, segregated world of country music. Clean-cut performers in pressed suits playing sanitized versions of rural American songs for all white audiences who preferred their entertainment predictable and their social boundaries clearly defined. Elvis Presley existed in the dangerous space between these worlds. Born in poverty in Tupelo, Mississippi, raised in the working-class neighborhoods of Memphis, Elvis had absorbed musical influences from everywhere. He'd spent countless hours on Beale Street, standing outside clubs he was too young to enter, listening to sounds that spoke to something deep in his soul. He'd learned gospel harmonies at the Assembly of God Church, country picking from the radio, and blues guitar from records he couldn't afford to buy, but somehow managed to hear. By July 1954, Elvis had recorded exactly 2 songs at Sun Records, That's All Right and Blue Moon of Kentucky. And they were causing a sensation unlike anything Memphis had ever experienced. Radio stations couldn't categorize his sound. Record stores didn't know where to put his singles. Audiences couldn't figure out whether to dance, cry, or just stand there in amazement. But success in 1954, Memphis came with complications that went far beyond music. Elvis's style was an open challenge to the racial segregation that defined Southern society. He was a white boy singing black music with an authenticity that was impossible to fake. He moved like the blues singers he'd watched on Beale Street. He phrased lyrics like gospel singers he'd heard in black churches. He attacked his guitar with the ferocity of Delta bluesmen who had influenced him from a distance he wasn't supposed to cross. This made him simultaneously fascinating and dangerous. White teenagers loved him because he represented rebellion against the stifling conventions of 1950s conformity. Black musicians respected him because he understood their music in ways that most white performers never attempted. But both communities also viewed him with suspicion. Whites because he threatened racial boundaries they wanted to maintain. Blacks because they worried he might be appropriating their culture without giving proper credit. Into this tense cultural landscape walked B.B. King, already recognized as one of the greatest blues guitarists who ever lived. Born Riley King on a Mississippi cotton plantation, he had clawed his way out of sharecropper poverty through sheer musical brilliance and relentless determination. His guitar playing was revolutionary, melodic yet powerful, technically sophisticated yet emotionally raw, capable of making a single note carry more meaning than most musicians could convey in an entire song. By 1954, B.B. King was a superstar within the black musical community, headlining venues across the South, recording hit records that defined the modern blues sound, influencing every guitarist who heard him play. But the racial barriers of the era meant his fame was largely confined to black audiences and the small number of white musicians brave enough to acknowledge their debt to blues masters. Elvis Presley was one of those musicians. He had been listening to B.B. King records since he was 15 years old, studying every solo, memorizing every vocal inflection, trying to understand how someone could make a guitar sound like it was laughing, crying, and singing all at the same time. Elvis's friends at Sun Records knew he could play entire B.B. King songs note for note, that he owned every record the blues master had released, that he spoke about King with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious figures. But owning records and seeing the man perform live were entirely different experiences. The night of July 30th, 1954, B.B. King had finished his own set at a club across town and decided to check out the young white singer everyone was talking about. He'd heard Elvis's records, had been impressed by the authentic blues feeling in the boy's voice. But he wanted to see for himself what all the fuss was about. Club Handy was packed beyond capacity when B.B. arrived. Word had spread that Elvis Presley was performing, and the audience was a fascinating mixture. Black musicians who had come to assess this young white blues singer, white teenagers who had been drawn by Elvis's revolutionary sound, music industry professionals trying to figure out how to categorize and market this unprecedented phenomenon. Elvis had been performing for about 20 minutes when B.B. entered through the back door. He'd planned to remain inconspicuous, to observe from the shadows, to make his own judgment about this young man who was causing such a stir in the Memphis music community. But Club Handy wasn't a large venue, and B.B. King wasn't someone who could remain invisible for long. His presence had a gravitational pull that other musicians felt immediately. The bass player noticed him first, his eyes widening with recognition. Then the drummer turned, nearly missing a beat, when he saw the blues legend standing casually near the back exit. Elvis was completely absorbed in his performance, eyes closed, lost in the music the way he always became when he was truly connected to a song. "That's All Right" was his showcase number, the song that had launched his career, the perfect demonstration of his ability to take familiar material and transform it into something completely new. Then he opened his eyes and saw B.B. King. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Elvis's voice caught mid-note. His guitar playing faltered. For a moment that lasted forever, the 19-year-old phenomenon who was revolutionizing popular music looked like exactly what he was. A kid who had just seen his hero walk into the room. The audience turned to see what had caused this sudden interruption. When they spotted B.B. King standing calmly in the back, a murmur rippled through the crowd. This was unprecedented. The king of the blues, arguably the most respected musician in Memphis, had come to hear the white boy everyone was talking about. What happened next shocked everyone in Club Handy. Instead of trying to continue his set, instead of acknowledging B.B. with a quick nod and pressing on with the show, Elvis did something that revealed everything about his character, his respect for musical tradition, and his understanding of what this moment meant. He stopped performing entirely. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said into the microphone, his voice carrying a reverence that surprised everyone who heard it. "We have royalty in the house tonight. The greatest guitar player who ever lived just walked in. B.B. King, would you please come up here and show us how it's really done?" The silence that followed was deafening. In 1954, Memphis, white performers didn't invite black musicians to share their stage. White audiences didn't applaud black artists in mixed-race venues. The unwritten rules of Southern society simply didn't allow for this kind of public acknowledgement across racial lines. But Elvis Presley had just rewritten those rules. B.B. King stood motionless for several seconds, processing what had just occurred. He'd been invited onto stages before, but never under circumstances like these. Never with such public respect. Never in a way that challenged so many social conventions simultaneously. Then he began walking toward the stage. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as B.B. King made his way through Club Handy. Some audience members looked nervous, uncertain about what they were witnessing. Others seemed thrilled by the unexpected turn of events. All of them understood they were experiencing something historic. Elvis stepped aside when B.B. reached the stage, gesturing toward the microphone with a deference that spoke volumes about his understanding of musical hierarchy. This wasn't his show anymore. This was a master class, and he was about to become a student. B.B. King picked up his guitar, the famous Lucille, and began to play. What followed was 15 minutes of the most extraordinary blues guitar playing anyone in that room had ever witnessed. B.B. played songs from his catalog, but he also improvised, responding to the energy of the moment, the unusual circumstances, the strange mix of excitement and tension that filled the air. Elvis stood beside him on stage, not as a co-performer, but as an observer, occasionally adding harmony vocals or rhythm guitar, but mostly just watching and learning. The sight of a young white musician standing respectfully while a black master demonstrated his craft was revolutionary in 1954 Memphis. But the real magic happened during B.B.'s final song of the impromptu set. As he launched into a slow, mournful blues number, Elvis began singing along, not trying to take over the performance, but adding vocal support that perfectly complemented B.B.'s guitar work. The two voices blended in a way that seemed impossible, the young white singer's instinctive understanding of blues tradition meshing perfectly with the master's lifetime of experience. When the song ended, the applause was thunderous. But more importantly, something fundamental had shifted in the relationship between these two musicians and in the broader understanding of what was possible in American popular music. B.B. King handed the microphone back to Elvis, but not before saying something that only the young singer could hear. Later, Elvis would tell people that B.B. had said, "You've got it, son. Don't let anyone tell you different." The rest of Elvis's set took on a completely different character. With B.B. King's blessing, with his public endorsement, Elvis performed with a confidence and authority he'd never displayed before. He played blues numbers he'd never attempted in public, channeling the approval of the master who had just validated his approach to music. When the show finally ended, the two musicians spent nearly an hour backstage, talking about guitar techniques, song structures, and the future of popular music. B.B. shared stories about his influences, his approach to the blues, his thoughts on how music could bridge racial divides. Elvis listened like a devoted student, asking questions that revealed his deep knowledge of blues history and his genuine respect for the tradition he was inheriting. The friendship that began that night would last for the rest of Elvis's life. B.B. King became more than an influence. He became a mentor, a supporter, and one of the few people who truly understood the musical and social pressures Elvis faced as a white performer working in traditionally black musical forms. More importantly, the public display of mutual respect between Elvis and BB that night began to change how audiences thought about musical boundaries. If the king of the blues could acknowledge a young white singer as a legitimate practitioner of the art form, if they could share a stage without compromising their individual identities, then maybe the strict segregation of American music didn't have to be permanent. The ripple effects of that July night extended far beyond Memphis. Record companies began to reconsider their marketing strategies, recognizing that audiences were hungry for the kind of musical integration Elvis and BB had demonstrated. Radio stations started playing a broader mix of music, acknowledging that listeners cared more about quality than color. Other musicians, both black and white, began collaborating in ways that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. But perhaps the most significant impact was on Elvis himself. The validation he received from B.B. King that night gave him the confidence to fully embrace his musical identity without apology. He stopped worrying about whether he had the right to sing blues music and focused instead on honoring the tradition while adding his own unique voice to it. Years later, when Elvis had become the most famous entertainer in the world, he would always credit B.B. King as one of his most important influences. He would invite B.B. to perform at his concerts, would seek his advice about musical decisions, would make sure that every interviewer understood the debt he owed to the blues masters who had shaped his sound. B.B. King, for his part, always spoke generously about Elvis's talent and his respect for blues tradition. He understood that Elvis's success had opened doors for black musicians, had introduced white audiences to musical forms they might never have discovered otherwise, had helped break down barriers that had kept American music artificially segregated for decades. The moment when Elvis stopped mid-performance to honor B.B. King lasted less than a minute, but its impact continues to resonate through popular music today. Every time musicians from different backgrounds collaborate, every time artistic excellence is recognized regardless of race or genre, every time respect trumps prejudice in the music industry, the spirit of that July night in Memphis is present. It was the night when two kings discovered that the kingdom of music was big enough for both of them. The night when a 19-year-old revolutionary learned that true strength comes from acknowledging your influences. The night when the blues met the future and found they could dance together. Most importantly, it was the night when music proved it could change hearts faster than laws could change minds. When art demonstrated its power to build bridges across any divide. When two extraordinary musicians showed the world what mutual respect looks like. The kid who stopped singing when his hero walked in. The room grew up to become the king of rock and roll. But he never forgot the lesson he learned that night in Club Handy, that true royalty recognizes and honors other royalty, regardless of color, regardless of background, regardless of what society expects. And B.B. King never forgot the young white singer who stepped aside to let a master show him how it was really done, who listened more than he talked, who understood that learning never stops, not even when you're already changing the world. Together, they created a moment that proved music's greatest power isn't its ability to entertain or even to inspire, but its capacity to remind us that we're all more alike than different, all searching for the same truth, all hoping to touch something eternal through the temporary magic of melody and rhythm and soul. That's what happened the night Elvis Presley stopped mid-performance when B.B. King walked in. History changed, barriers fell, and two kings discovered they could share the same throne.